let's take a look at how we can quickly build the insert part for my axis, and then how we can attach or make the paddle to grow organically out of that shape. So I go to my frame, select my ring, press Shift D to duplicate that profile, press Escape to stop moving it, and then I press P to separate, meaning I'm moving that polygon mesh out of this object and put it into a new object, like this one, as you can see. Then where's my object center point? It's up there. So if I would rotate, you see it rotates around the object center up here. So we have to reset it. So I could, with this object selected, press spacebar, type in set origin, and say origin to geometry, and now it's perfectly centered. And to make life a little bit easy for me, I'm also going to say apply rotation. So you see that the local space now is nearly the same like the global space. Because if I go into edit mode, you can see that those points are slightly rotated. So by hand I rotate it and try to see how much that is. So it looks like 5 degrees. So I press escape because I don't really want to rotate it. But in object mode, I can now rotate this one 5 degrees. Actually minus 5 degrees. And now we see this is, for example, perfectly up and down. And I would like to add another 90 degrees. So I'm going to rotate this by minus 95. And you might maybe ask yourself why I'm doing all this. Because I'm going to create a ring, just duplicate it, and the ring, for example, hits the axis of my paddle. Because now it's very easy for me to simply, in this mode, say, well, I extrude this one inwards, then I move this one out. Actually, hold on, I'm going rather to there. E. One more time. E, scale it in, maybe a little bit in, and extrude another one and just move it somewhat in. So I'm sculpting somewhat that surface that should stick out. And the reason why I created this ring initially was now I could try to, for example, select this face, and it is perfectly aligned up to the global Y and Z axis. So I could press E, move it out, rotate it a little bit, press E, move it out, rotate it a little bit, press E, and then move it out. And I can just make use of my global orientation for perfectly moving this geometry left and right. Because if I go to here and say 0, it just snaps back to the orientation of, for example, my mesh, or minus 95. I can also rotate this one maybe down to see where, for example, my paddle would be. And then I could still go ahead and continue maybe adjusting the mesh and play with it a little bit Maybe this edge I would like to slide down a little bit more. This one to arc. Maybe here I would like to have a creased edge, or actually not really, and this one should slide down a little bit more. This one should slide down a little bit more. So you see, that's very easy to work with. And let me undo this. So I'm going back to a very straight object that's easier to work with. And then at this point, I could maybe position a cursor to there, and then, for example, add a cube, scale this cube down, and maybe let's bring in our computer model so I can use this one as a very basic reference for the size of my pedal. So that seems to be very close to it. And then Shift S, snap to the cursor. And I'm going to very quickly sculpt a basic pedal. So all I need to do here in this case is I'm going to delete those faces. And the process I'm going to use right now is actually not really rocket science, or the only way how you can do it. There are multiple ways to do this. Because in what order you build something, that's a nice part about polygon modeling. It's very often not really important. So you see that I'm filling in those parts. And fill in those sides. And maybe those could be scaled away from each other a little bit, like this. And then let's say here I would like to have a connection, because we need a space for the tunnel. Let's see if we can bridge this. Yes, we can, but we still have internal faces that we need to delete. And you see him just creating a few more loop cuts and then scaling them away from each other to tighten this shape. Yeah, and there we have, at least for the moment, a very basic but still functional model for giving an idea about scale and proportion of, for example, the pedal. And now, of course, this whole part is not the same on the other side, so we can't really use the mirror tool. So I'm going to use a different approach. So I'm going to select this ring and this ring and say Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I have a new position which is kind of like directly at the center of my wheel here. And then I can select this last edge here and say set my pivot point to a 3D cursor, S, X, and 0, So this point is now moved to the center part, and then I can select all my mesh, say Shift D to duplicate, press X, so I don't move it by accident. I could press R and X, type in 180, so I move it over to the other side. And now I have to mirror it over along the x-axis, so I could press Ctrl M and press X and press return. And because I'm using my 3D cursor as my pivot point, it mirrors over this 3D cursor, which in my case is also the center of this part. So I can select those two lines and say remove double, and then removes those 14 points. And now I have a complete solid part. And then this one maybe I have to bring over as well. And for the moment, I could say Alt D. So I make a clone, and then I say Ctrl M to mirror over along the x-axis, and then I'm still using my 3D cursor and say rotate along X 180 degrees, and there we see that it moved it over then to there. So if I start sculpting this one, so let's say this part I moved longer, of course it doesn't show it on the other side because it's not really using the symmetry object. So I might then have to rebuild or delete half of it and then copy, duplicate, mirror, and rotate it over. And here, because I used a clone, what I do here, you will see there. So there I only have one object I need to take care of.